Thank you, Matthew. Look, last time I was here with a Victorian minister, I was discussing clean energy as well. It wasn't quite as palatial as this. That was about 10 years ago. And at that time, the topic was clean coal, carbon net and carbon capture and storage in Victoria. And isn't it funny, ladies and gentlemen, how times have changed, although some elements haven't quite changed fast enough. In all the time that's passed in those 10 years, the cost of carbon capture and storage really hasn't come down much. The cost of carbon net hasn't come down much, but the cost of producing real clean energy has fallen to levels that even without carbon capture and storage, no new coal-fired power station can meet. So, ladies and gentlemen, the race to supply Victoria's new energy need and the energy mix of the future, it is clearly renewables that are leading the way, and they're winning the race. And Minister, as you can see, there are 400 people here in this room, and they're waiting for you to fire that starting gun. Victoria is getting underway in that race, and all of us are going to be competing to make sure our businesses can share in these future prospects. Now, the changes that we'll see going forward will provide both opportunities and challenges, and I wanted to talk to you today to give you a bit of insight into what we see and talk to you about how the CEFC sees these opportunities here and challenges in Victoria. So I thought I'd start off with our mission. This was set up and established almost 5 years ago when the CEFC was first contemplated, and our mission was very simple, and it's still very relevant today. Our mission is to accelerate Australia's transformation towards a more competitive economy in a carbon-constrained world, acting as a catalyst to increase investment in emissions reductions. So when you think of sustainable transformation, I encourage you to think about the CEFC as a partner. The emissions reduction challenge we all face is very clear, and we all need to act. No business, no government, and no individual can hide from the very clear science. We must accelerate that activity, and we must accelerate our plans to reduce emissions, and we're here to help, and we're very pleased to hear the additional policy methods and proposals of the Victorian Government to accelerate that action even further. It is important that we all take urgent action, and that action needs to be taken in Australia effectively and efficiently as possible. And at the CEFC for the last 3 years, we've been trying to demonstrate clearly how that can be done. We are effectively the nation's largest development bank, and in all the activities that we've been engaged in since we've started, we've complied or applied brutal commercial rigour to our investment decisions, expecting a return on our investments because, after all, we're investing your money. So every investment that we've made in our portfolio has a return above the government's cost of funds, and when we invest money, we draw in the private sector with us to try and bring more money to the table, more investment partners and more innovation. The CEFC has been very active in Victoria, particularly in the last year, and I thought I'd share with you some of those projects to give you a little bit of an idea of what we're doing. So we've committed around 1.8 billion of investments across Australia, involving projects worth around 6 billion, and I'm pleased to say, as a Victorian, that Victoria actually has the largest share of our portfolio by investment commitments. So in Victoria, we've committed $232 million worth of investments across approximately 10 projects. And 2 of those projects quite large projects occurred this year, and we'll talk about those in a moment. And through our co-financing and aggregation partnerships, we financed already another 75 small investments for energy efficiency upgrades and other smaller renewable projects. We have a very healthy pipeline of projects in Victoria, and that is growing all the time. So what I'll do is I'll talk about what last year was, and we can talk to you about what the strategy is so you understand the holistic approach that the CEFC takes when we're looking at investing in this sector. We have a plan and we have a strategy. It has taken us, to be honest, this is a developing market, and it's been challenging for us as an institution over the last 4 years, but it's very clear what we needed to do. we needed to understand and address the known sources of emissions within that economy. So we identified that carbon-intensive electricity, large emissions from the transport sector, and inefficient energy use are the three pillars of the decarbonisation challenge that we must address. And to do that, what we've established is that what we need cleaner power solutions, and we need better cities and a better built environment. So what we've done then is said, let's build business platforms across those sectors so we can attack those emissions. And each sector now has a business platform attached to it. There's dedicated private sector specialists who understand the sector's challenge, and I'm very lucky with the professional team that we have at the CEFC. We have a very clear purpose, and we know the emissions challenge that we're now addressing. All of the team are very passionate about what we're undertaking here. The science and the serious consequences that we're addressing are very important now and for the future generations. And we act as an organisation with the same professionalism that you will see from our banking partners. We are seeking the best outcomes at the lowest cost. We are acting like a commercial bank, but we understand that our return is not purely dollars and cents. We also have a public policy obligation. In terms of new sources of capital, we are sourcing new sources of capital, and I'll just pop back if that works brilliantly. So in terms of new sources of capital, we're hunting out those new sources of capital to accelerate activity. So we're combining our capital with the capital of the banks and with the investment funds. And as I mentioned, we're fortunate to have strong relationships with many of the banking groups that are here today. And today, if you walk into, as a small business owner, to a branch of now the National Australia Bank, the Commonwealth Bank or the Westpac Bank, anywhere across Australia, and sit down with your bank manager and say, I'm about to do a project for my factory. I have choices of equipment to make. I could put renewables on or not put renewables on. Your bank manager can now help you. He has a list of equipment which helps you choose the most efficient equipment. And if you do, you get a 70 basis point discount on your loan, which is funded through the banks from the CEFC right around Australia. 400 businesses now have already invested appropriately, making the right decisions, looking at the right equipment, choosing the best and the most efficient option, rather than just going on price. And this platform is scalable. So what we now have is a delivery tool where the federal government, through the CEFC, can direct action across the economy, push in businesses to invest appropriately. So we understand the challenge, we understand the sources, we're building the financial solutions to encourage others to take the right investment decisions to lower emissions. It all sounds pretty easy on paper, but it hasn't been that easy. But let's just talk about what we did last year. So last year we committed more funds than ever before, $837 million worth of funds. We supported more projects. We mobilised more private capital than ever before. We invested in projects that had a total value of $2.5 billion, and for every dollar the CEFC put in, the private sector put in about $1.95. In terms of a few projects last year, in the cleaner power solutions, as I mentioned, cleaner power solutions, better buildings and better built environment, they're the two areas we want. We assisted with the construction and finance of the Ararat wind farm with a $70 million loan. That's a $450 million wind farm. At the moment, we're just finalising our commitment to the large-scale solar program, which ARENA has. They've got a $100 million grants program. We're complementing that with $250 million of loans. We expect to see more utility-scale solar built out around the country. We're also developing financial products that match the current market, and they're flexible enough to deal with the challenges that you face. So we now have a new RET accelerator loan, where the interest rate flexes depending upon future energy prices, because we understand it's still difficult to secure long-term PPAs. In the better cities and the built environment sector, we've just announced that we have committed to the construction finance for a 5.5-star NABERS rated multi-storey office building in Geelong. That is the first 5.5-star building built outside the CBD in Australia. We're working with the City of Melbourne to accelerate their zero carbon goals. We're working with the University of Melbourne to do the same, to accelerate their targets to be carbon neutral by 2030. We realise that there's a lot more to do. We can only do so much. So in terms of mobilising capital, we are developing new funds, new projects, so that our money can be brought together with other pools of money to set up new vehicles. So there's a new bioenergy fund to help people who are doing waste-to-energy projects and biomass projects. We're working with Palisades, a private equity group, to deliver equity to help you fund renewable energy projects. And with EG Group, we've worked out that we need to upgrade C and D grade buildings that are existing all around Australia, particularly outside the CBD. We're not able to do that directly ourselves by encouragement, so with this fund we're moving in to buy the buildings and upgrade them within the fund and then put them back out into the market. Now everybody likes a few stories and a few pictures. So here is a picture. It's a very important picture. It's the first wind turbine blade that's arrived at Ararat Wind Farm. Minister, you should remember this. This was on the very day that Premier Andrews and yourself announced the renewable energy targets for Victoria. CEFC provided debt finance to that project. It was 76% merchant. The renewable sector, fortunately, is showing signs of life again, but there is still a gap and we're facing a challenge to meet the renewable energy target. There are few long-term PPAs in the market at the moment, and that means developers are still having challenges funding their projects, but the CEFC is open for well-structured merchant transactions. That said, Minister, any policy support that could provide long-term power price certainty would be very welcome by the sector. In terms of the Victorian building we're doing in Geelong, when you drive to Geelong down that Surf Coast Road, you'll soon see this coming out of the sky. It's a $120 million building. It'll be the WorkSafe headquarters in Geelong. Quite simply, they were building this building at only a 5-star, and you'd say, well, why did we get involved? Well, to make a difference between a 5-star and a 5.5-star building is a 25% reduction in carbon emissions. If you are going to build assets, you need to build them now appropriately. We can't have people building poor quality assets anymore. Governments, companies and councils must stop it. They must actually build assets of the future rather than liabilities. So this is one target sector. We're busy in community housing in New South Wales at the moment. We expect to be busy in hotels, shopping centres, student accommodation, aged care facilities. We have to stop building poor performing buildings. They're going to create liabilities and costs for us all in the future. And surprisingly, it doesn't cost that much to build at better standards. Now, in classic CEDA style, they welcome debate and discussion, so I thought I would take you around a discussion of why we're so excited in Victoria and about Victoria's prospects. So I thought I'd look around and see what's going on and just imagine what the future can hold here in Victoria. And I thought I'd start with my southern friend down here. I've called him Tassaretti. With some of the world's best wind sites and hydro facilities that it could all be upgraded, with biomass going begging, just make Basslink 1 right and then plug in Basslink 2 and you've got Tassaretti. It's available to balance the renewable load of Victoria. Now, aided by the policies of the Minister, we'll soon see many more wind farms popping up along the west coast of the state and down south. Around 60 sites are needed just to replace one Loy Yang. So there's a lot of work to be done, and there'll have to be augmentation of the transmission system around Victoria to enable that to happen. We will be spending billions on this transition, and far too little of this equipment that we need is made in Australia. In Victoria, we are fortunate. There is one turbine tower manufacturer that is ready to provide more jobs. And if the Minister likes, as part of the program, she could encourage greater Victorian input whenever you're looking at projects in Victoria. So I was in a coffee shop down the Surf Coast and people were talking about blades. They were trying to convince me that a wind turbine blade is nothing more than a long surfboard, and they'd like to actually see those facilities and those factories built down the Surf Coast. If we keep going west, we've got the green triangle that bulges with biomass. I know you've all been involved in these wonderful transactions, but tax incentives from the old MIS schemes, all of that forestry could be put to work. If we go further west to South Australia awaits. Out on the Eyre Peninsula, one of the old projects we talked about before, It's the westernmost port of the national transmission system, which runs all the way up to Brisbane. There's wind, there's plenty of sun out there, and when the sun's shining out there, it's 2 hours after it is dark and everyone's cuddling their teddies in Sydney and Brisbane. So you can deliver the sun's energy from South Australia right the way across the eastern seaboard if only we had transmission. Up along the Murray, obviously, climate change hasn't taken the Murray away, but we're starting to see many large utility-scale solar projects coming up. They will provide reliable daytime power for Victoria. And around Melbourne, things are changing as well. Just imagine a world where we could have our head offices again in Melbourne, because our staff then would be able to fly in for a 9 o'clock meeting and actually take a train from the airport to the city rather than be trapped in despair with 2 hours of traffic. Around the City of Melbourne will be stretching themselves. They'll be reaching that carbon neutral status. And can you imagine workers laid off with the collapse of an apartment boom suddenly are busy upgrading those office buildings as maybe the Melbourne City Council rates are changed, and that people who continue to operate 1 or 2 star buildings find that their rates go up, and those people who are being responsible in 5 and 6 star buildings find their rates go down. And can you imagine being a building in the city and looking over to South Bank and looking at that huge roof on the convention centre and seeing it covered with solar panels, in a pattern, of course, that says Jeff. And in Dandenong, where the factories produce, Avoca trucks and Volgren buses and Bombardier trams, they've established a fuel cell hub. And we'll be laughing soon as we'll have to pull out all these emergency diesel generators we've just put in around the state, understanding that every fuel cell bus or garbage truck is actually a mobile emergency generator. Imagine our towns will then have towns and cities will have more resilient power, they'll be clean and they'll be moving. Now, Dandenong is a hip town. It was a great place. I went to school there. And on the new rapid transport system that I can imagine, it'll be connecting the Latrobe Valley to the city. Imagine, with the power stations closing down in the Latrobe Valley, it thrives. It ellipses the Yarra Valley. It's filled with grapes, it's filled with olives, it's filled with boutique dairies and food. It becomes the perfect escape for Melbourne, but is linked by high-speed rail. Go Victoria is all I can say. Ladies and gentlemen, this transition to a low-carbon world can be done. Victoria will remain a great place to live, with a little vision, with a lot of planning and an open-minded attitude. Together we can build a better future, and the CEFC is here to support your efforts, and we welcome all the efforts from you all and the Victorian Government. Thank you.